Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rails 1021st New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the huge pleasure and privilege today of being your MC for a conversation featuring Chloe Chiasson, Madison, and Madison Ford. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Artist Chloe Chiasson's practice explores themes of self-expression and queer identity. Figures inhabit environments reminiscent of her childhood in Texas that not only include but also celebrate queer identity within its distinct cultural context. Chiasson received her bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin and an MFA from the New York Academy of Art. In 2023, Chiasson was awarded the prestigious Fountainhead Residency, and Chiasson has shown internationally in London, Germany, and Hong Kong. And our host today, Madison Ford, is a Texas-based writer and actor. We're so lucky to have her as editorial assistant here at the Rail, and she's also the editor-in-chief of The Inquisitive Eater. Her work has appeared in the Brooklyn Rail, Texas Monthly, Architectural Digest, Paper City, and elsewhere. She holds an MFA in fiction writing from the New School. Madison and Chloe, thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor and a joy. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Madison, to get us started.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And thank you, Chloe, for being here. I'm so excited to get started with speaking about your work and this beautiful show at Dallas Contemporary, which is on through March 17th, from what I remember. Is that correct, Chloe?
Yeah. A week.
All right, guys. So get down to Dallas if you're not here already. You got a few more days. I think it would be great to pull up the slides, Eleanor, just so people can get a sense of the scale and materials present in Chloe's work. And on that note, I think just to ground our audience a little bit in your practice, can you speak to the materials that you used to develop this series, Chloe, as well as your practice in general? You've mentioned to me before how the practice of constructing these works works into and against traditionally gendered roles of practice. And I would just love to hear more of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so for materials first, just like a sort of materials list. Obviously, I would say these are all predominantly paintings, but I use a lot of different materials, things like foam, wood, resin, fiberglass, metal, sometimes really kind of anything I can get my hands on. But almost all of the objects in each piece are handmade. So like the mirrors you see on the trucks, things that sometimes can look like maybe I just bought them. They're actually just foam, and then I just distress them and paint them to make them look as real as possible. I think it's fun to kind of juxtapose that with sometimes real objects. So materials, yeah, just a bunch of different things, sometimes like LED lights, mirrors, stuff like that, really kind of anything I can get my hands on. But starting to work in that way, for me, kind of started to develop in my MFA program, 5 years ago now. I was really interested in finding a way to kind of juxtapose the different ideas of what makes a capable hand. So where I'm from, traditional like gendered roles are still like very reinforced, and there's very much like what is women's work and what is men's work. And I grew up in that, believing that, and kind of just inherently being who I am, going against that grain. Art in New York gave me the opportunity to start to think about that differently and figure out how I could kind of honor all of the parts of me of what is feminine and what is masculine. And so I wanted to find a way of making that kind of merge those two ideas together of what is the feminine hand like traditionally. They maintain the household, they cook the meals, they carry the children, the men do men's work, they work in the yard, they build the house, this and that. And so I wanted to just kind of flip that around and like force them together, to kind of just acknowledge both of those parts of me. And it turned into this. And so for me, a lot of the physical, what would normally where I'm from be called men's work, the woodworking, the metal fabrication, stuff like that is used to kind of honor that. And then the actual materials I use, beyond the way that I use the materials, being very crafty, traditionally feminine, thinking about my hands in a very like caressing way, wanting to just kind of like touch and change whatever I can get my hands on. So yeah, it was really just me kind of wanting to be like, well, what really is what's men's work and women's work, right? Like, you know, like we can do it all. So how can I put that all together and use that to talk about kind of the same thing? So it is a way for me to metaphorically and materially speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, seeing the works in person, you really are confronted with these opposing forces of delicate paint and then construction work. And maybe even, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, we can get a little bit more detail on these hands, which is a great example of that. This is one of the first works you see when you enter the show. And we see this detail of this tattoo against these huge rings, and it's really something to stand before. When we're talking about place is really, really present in this show, Chloe. When you were developing this work, were you sitting with where you're from in East Texas more, or does that feel like a force that's always present in the works that you're developing over the past few years?
Yeah, I mean, I would say generally it kind of runs through the work. It has and it will continue to. But I will say that this show in particular, more so than my previous ones, I was very much focused on my small town home, not just Texas or like South Texas. This one I really was thinking about my hometown, Port Neches, Port Arthur, Beaumont, just that general area. And I think that started because when Emily Edwards, my curator at Dallas Contemporary, shout out Emily if you're here, love you. She was really thinking about the show as a sort of homecoming, right? Because it was gonna be my first show in Texas after moving from Texas, becoming an artist, doing all this stuff and making work that I think already kind of resonates with people in big cities like New York, LA, wherever else the work has shown, but might be a little bit more of like a fighting power in a state like Texas. So I really wanted to kind of speak to the Texas audience by making a body of work that felt familiar to people living in Texas, even if they aren't a part of the queer community, seeing these scenes and figures and probably having experienced a setting like that or an experience like that to kind of like allow them entry into it. And if, you know, no background on the work and depending on their personal or political views, kind of being confronted with something that maybe they don't necessarily agree with without realizing it, and being drawn into it before that realization. So then they're already kind of hooked in sitting with this work and I guess challenging in that way. And then, you know, contrarily for queer Texans being able to go into this space and kind of be brought into this world that maybe for them feels a little bit more comforting and allows them to feel seen and celebrated and all of that. So it was important to me to really, really focus on home rather than a more generalized Texas Southern landscape. And whether I continue in like going into a deeper dive into that or not, I'm not sure. I think I will for the foreseeable future, but yeah, you know, it's just Texas and where I'm from. There's so much for me personally to unpack. And this is the way that I do it. And it's the way that I kind of like honor and love where I'm from and also challenge it in the ways that I feel like I need to and that it needs to be challenged.
I really want to circle back in a minute to your exploration of not only queer life, but what you've often called a queer utopia that's present in this show. But before we move on to that, I want to explore place a little bit more. People outside of Texas, I think, sometimes can think of it as a monolith in very many different ways, like politically, socially, and even landscape. I think people kind of see Texas as one big West Texas, Southwest landscape. When reality, there's really 4 different geographical regions within Texas that are very distinct from one another. And the area that Chloe is from is in the coastal plains of Texas, which has a region that feels very much similar to what we think of, which it is, the Gulf, and what people might think of when they think of Louisiana, things like that. And when you're walking through the show, and it could just be because I'm from Texas and have that knowledge, I feel like I could get such a sense of that specific, like even geographical sense of place. And I was wondering, like, in your artistic process, when you're developing these scenes, do you feel like there is something going on outside of the frame as you're putting each work together, or does it feel like a flash of a moment, or are these part of a larger world for you when you're putting the show together?
I would say that yes, it's part of a larger world, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
Yeah.
But this one, yeah, was very much focusing, and I did want you to feel that coastal plain, the Gulf, with the crawfish sign on the piece that we're looking at right now. And I don't, and that specificity hasn't shown up in my work yet until this show. And I don't know how much I'll dive into the specificity of that, because I like to leave space for the viewer's own specificity and relativity to exist. But yeah, am I answering your question? I might have gotten in it.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Yeah.
I'm just really taken where
Oh,
even
but
though we're not really getting the whole landscape, we're sensing that anyway. And I think with so many types of art, sometimes artists are compelled to like create the backstory, create the wider story that's not really caught in that specific
yeah.
piece of art in that specific moment. And I was curious if these are developed kind of in moment for you, or as you're working with them, do you have a sense of like a larger narrative or
Yeah,
space?
so going into making a body of work or a show, I have the story in mind. I like to think of each show as it's kind of like creating a short story, a film, a novel, what have you. So it is a very focused in body of work. Things do change as I'm making them, but my process is I make all of my mock-ups in Photoshop prior to. That way I can also figure out how they're going to be built and designed. So I really get to build them all, realize them all together before actually physically realizing them. But off the first thing you just said when you were talking about the way that people think about Texas, who aren't from Texas, right? They don't realize that there's so many different parts in Texas. And this is true for any small town, any big city even, but the lived experience is always very different from what you read about, what you see in the news and this and that. Still lots of truth there in what you read about and what you see in the news, but very nuanced. A lot of things are missed in that. And so I wanted to lean into that with this show, because I did start thinking about that more, right? I started thinking about, okay, like, where am I from in Texas, and how does it differ from other parts of Texas, and what are the things that I love about it and the things that I hate about it, and real moments that I've experienced there that you maybe wouldn't experience in cities in Texas or other parts of Texas. So I did want to, and I do it just kind of generally in my work, kind of acknowledge those nuances in the lived experience of Texas versus someone who hasn't lived there.
Yeah. I think something that also arises when, whether you're just looking through images in the slideshow, but also, walking through the show, there's a lot of car imagery present. We have keys, side and rear view mirrors, there's severed portions of cars. And you've spoken with me in the past about how the car is a very significant space for you to explore. Do you want to go into that both and how it ties back to both youth and queer life in Texas?
Yeah. I think generally speaking, even outside of the queer community, vehicles, cars are where, as a kid, as a teen, a lot of people, it's the only place that you find your freedom at that time. And a lot of firsts happen there, first kisses, first other things. But for me, that was the most, like, that was kind of the only space it felt like I had before and I came out at 16, and I know it's funny to say came out now because we don't have to do that anymore, which is like great. But at that time, I did still have to deal with the whole coming out process. And leading up to that point, the only way that I could kind of like explore all of the same like firsts and intimacies and stuff like that my friends was in like secret spots and secret places and safe spaces, and in a small town that's really scarce. So we'd always just get in a car, get in a truck, and honestly go down some back road, go sit down by the river, sometimes drive through the town cemetery, like just any place you could find where it was you had some privacy to explore these moments in this you know, finding of self or coming of age just in a totally different way. And yeah, so I do use a lot of car imagery for that reason, and I think I'll continue to, because I also do feel like, again, going back to allowing for relativity to the viewer who maybe isn't within the queer community, that does that.
I think when thinking about the car as a safe space, it really, when I was looking to review your show, it evoked a lot of ideas about how the politicized body both exists in real life, but also is represented in art. You know, so often the female body, the queer body, bodies of color, they do experience heightened levels of violence in real life. And so oftentimes in representation in media, that violence is something that is portrayed, you know, thoughtfully or unthoughtfully. It's often something that's presented to us. And something that was striking about your show is that you were giving the politicized body a space of romanticism is something that came to mind for me, but you often use the word utopia. I would love to hear you speak more about that, about how you wanted to represent the queer body and experience in the show.
Yeah, and so you know, going back to telling a story, stories often are fiction, and you know, it's hard to it is all kind of fiction, but it's also not, right? It comes from very real experiences, lived experiences, but some of it is made up, and it's just kind of like me imagining what my life could have looked like coming up, what I wish it would have been, but sometimes even I go back on saying that because I kind of wouldn't have changed anything because it's brought me to, you know, who I am now and where I am now. But I guess for that reason, it's like it's fun for me to make spaces like this, worlds like this, but I don't know. I think it's just really important to like make work that isn't necessarily like inundated with the political, but does, I guess, like take it into account, like acknowledge it as like a queer existence is always political. You can never escape the political. Being a queer person, like you are politicized no matter what. So I guess I just really want to make work in figures and like moments that are just lived. It's not screaming at the top of their lungs that, you know, I'm taking up this space, like fight me, whatever. It's just like we're just living, like here we are, like it's the exact same moments that everyone else has experienced. And I just kind of wanted this like just to like explore the mundane in that way and make work that you know is a story that everyone knows, that everyone has experienced, but is just filled with queer people, with lesbians, with, you know, however you identify, or like what you find in the figures. Yeah, I guess that's kind of like the general idea of it.
Yeah, that was very beautifully put, Chloe. I think you approach the political in a pretty balanced way in this show because, like you said, inherently it's very hard to avoid a political reality when you're talking about politicized humans who have often been politicized against their own choosing. And especially having this show in Texas, which is often in politics and covered in the news right now of passing certain legislations that are further politicizing queer people. I think your approach to an archival exploration of politics was very interesting. Eleanor, if it's possible for us to go back a bit, it's the storefront image. And I can grab the title for you as well, Eleanor. It's the corner store. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. This work has so many layers to it, both on a construction materials level and your archival work. I want to know, for people who can't see, when you see this work in real life, the store goes inward into the wall a little bit as if it is an actual storefront, and you can see popcorn ceilings. We've got beer cans littered. It's really quite detailed, but the newspaper especially, I would love if you could speak to the research that went into putting that part of the work together, Chloe.
Yeah, that one was really fun for me because that was really the first time that I started diving into really where I'm from in an archival way, not just in a memory way. So a lot of the articles on the newspaper are like, you'll see my aunt as like the cavalcade queen. I think there's a photo in there of my mom and pop of I think she might have been homecoming queen, or she might have not won homecoming queen. I actually can't remember. She's watching right now, so she'll probably get on to me. But so there's a lot of I wanted to just kind of explore the differences over the years of what's covered in the news where I'm from. And some of the articles are from like the 1930s even. There's articles in there about crawfish races. We eat a lot of crawfish where I'm from. There's articles in there about whenever segregation was being discussed, and like what the headlines were on that. And so just seeing just kind of like looking into the problematic nature of in like big moments in history then and now, not only how they were covered, but even if they were covered or what was being talked about, like crawfish races, maybe over ideas or things happening like segregation laws. So again, it's just kind of playing with my loyalty to my family and where I'm from and how I was brought up, but also being able to look back now as an adult and find the major problem areas and like points of resistance or things that I can kind of work with. And that's all in that newspaper. And that felt important to me because it is such a moment. It's the focal point of the piece. I would say this is the focal point of the show. So I needed it to be like really, really thought through. And I have an amazing partner, Lauren. She helped me research everything. She loves this kind of stuff and like really looked into all of it for me as well. So that was also fun for us to get to do together. But and even calling my mom and stuff like that and being like, hey, if y'all have any, were there big things that happened I could look up and find online. And my sister and her husband just started a big barbecue joint. It's called Redbird. And that's in there. So yeah, I don't know, I go back and forth between, I play with a lot of sentimentality and stuff like that. And, I know there's, in art, you shouldn't necessarily do that, but I enjoy it. And like you said, the romanticism, I do lean into the like love story of people and places and spaces. But also being able to just kind of, like contradict that, love can exist with like so many complications and so much hate and things that need to change. And, I think that's like a common thread in my work, but really embodied in this piece in that newspaper.
Yeah, that sort of research also came to life too when you were choosing who to model these figures after as well. That and you can speak more to that, but I found it really interesting because the research element that went into your models of sorts for this show leaves almost like a timeless haunting to it. You want to share?
Yeah. So, and these figures and faces that we see, I've used for the past few years, and kind of how I started down this like road of these characters, that do feel very historical and nostalgic. I got into whenever I moved to New York, and it was the first time that I started learning about the people who came before me. Things like the Stonewall riots and, like stuff like that, like I really didn't know about. I didn't have access to. I didn't even know to search for that. And so moving here and being exposed to just the culture of New York and the queer culture within New York and the history of that, really just kind of allowed me to find myself, and it really changed my life. And for me, it's kind of honoring those people who came before me and kind of paved the way for people like me. So even though the work isn't necessarily talking about who they are, some of them are known figures, some of them I just found in random photos that, maybe someone watching or who watches this back will even know the person. But it just felt important to me to use, right, these people, these women or people who came before as the characters to kind of act out this world and these spaces that I'm trying to make now. It almost feels like sort of like an exciting duty of mine to contribute to that same archive in history. But I think it's important to, when you're trying to talk about the present, to look to the past. For me, at least, I don't think I could speak to the present without being informed by the past with what I'm talking about. And so this idea of nostalgia, I think it comes up because of that. So it's not necessarily, nostalgia is wanting to return to the past and missing it and this and that. But for me, it just feels like another tool, like anything else that I use, any other material, like painting or foam. Using nostalgia allows me to use the past to talk about the present, to understand it better. And that's what these figures do for me.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting how our faces do somehow seem marked by the time in which we live. Like when you walk through this show,
Yeah.
or you told me the background on this, these people did seem to be of another time, even though they were acting out a idealized, futuristic utopia. And part of that could be the fact that when we see something in some sort of sepia, black and white, saturated tones, that's, subconsciously evoked for us.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is something about our features and how there's something there.
I know it does change over time. It's really interesting.
Yeah. So it's a pretty unique element of the show. I'd love to talk a little bit more too about the theatrical feels like the wrong word, but there is something like exciting and entertainingly like confrontational about seeing these works in person. You play with scale a lot in certain works. For instance, this rearview mirror that we're seeing in front of us, Highway to Hell, and the carabiner, the keychain piece, and then even the corner store work too. There's something that evokes like the artistry of set work too. Did you keep in mind the experience of the viewer who's walking through the space when you're developing these works?
Yeah, I mean, going back to me wanting to tell a story with each show, that's really what a show is for me, is kind of developing this cinema-like, theater-like walkthrough. Like you are walking into a set or, a world, really, a show, a film, whatever it may be. And for me, I think, I've just always really enjoyed large work because I've always felt very humbled by it. And I've always felt very interested in how it was made, especially if it was a queer or female artist. I loved that. I loved seeing them taking something like that on and just doing it and making it happen. And that's honestly originally how I got into large scale work, was that just wanting to, growing up an athlete, wanting to use my body in that way and make just something big. And, I think now that I've kind of reeled that back in, and though that's still there, that's not necessarily the purpose of it, I guess, anymore. It's still in it, but for me, when I'm making it, I'm not trying to like make this big and bad thing. I am just trying to make it actually, in a weird way, just feel more welcoming, and also kind of like their own space. I do want it to feel like it's a totally separate world. So when you walk in, you are kind of dwarfed in comparison. And I think depending on who you are, in your beliefs, you're gonna experience it differently. But the immersiveness of it is important to me. I feel like when you walk into a very immersive environment, it can feel intrusive, it can feel welcoming, daunting, exciting. I feel like there's a lot of paradoxes in it that can be explored. And I think that's kind of like what the queer experience is. It's like this coexisting of anxiety and comfort, which I've said before, but remains so true in this idea of exclusion and inclusion. And I guess like the kind of paradoxical needs and desires for both and all of the above. Yeah.
And this is probably taboo in the regard of how we're taught to engage with an art space, but what are the interactive expectations between artwork and audience in this exhibition? I know I talked to you a little bit about that in our walkthrough, but you've put a lot of thought into the sensational elements of this. In Highway to Hell, the rearview mirror piece, smell is an element that you employed. There's so much texture throughout in all the works, and there's these visual Easter eggs and storytelling details that could theoretically require closer inspection to uncover. And how can these elements, these intentions, live within a traditional gallery space where guests are so often told and enforced like not to get too close to a work, not to engage with it in that way?
I mean, simple answer, I always ask them to allow people to get close to it. Because the inside of the newspaper, for instance, is more important than the outside of the newspaper. And you can only see that if you're very much leaning in. And I guess I wasn't thinking about that, honestly, in the beginning. I do have a very different background from most artists. Like, I didn't grow up in the art world. I didn't grow up an artist. So for me, I'm not thinking about those things, right? I'm just making this thing that I think is cool and like says something like meaningful and that I'm enjoying making and is very fun for me. And then it just ends up in this space where now it's this like very, like hands off, be very careful. But in the studio, I think all artists can attest to this. It's very different, right? We just kind of toss things around. We're just getting into the nitty gritty. And so, yeah, I do, if I was there, I would be imploring people to get in, like take a super close look, like, and maybe you can find some meaning in that there too, right? Of like, the sense of privacy or lack thereof, you're kind of then at that point invading their space, which isn't necessarily like the goal in the beginning. So yeah, I think like kind of juxtapositions like that are fun.
You brought up your non-traditional path toward visual art, and I mean that just came back to me too. It's a background in athletics, right? Is that correct? I'd love to hear more, Chloe, you talk about, like, do you find that transition between an athletically focused childhood into the visual arts, do the tenets of that find your way into your practice? Like, what was that journey like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think like for me, when I first started painting, when I moved to New York, it was like fun and great at first, but I got bored pretty quickly. And that's actually why I started getting into more materials and stuff like that, was because the reason that I came to art was I wanted something that I enjoyed. I wanted that factor of play. That was the emphasis for me. So I wanted to, make a process that felt very active and I guess kind of agile for me, being able to switch around as I needed and as I pleased. And the scale of the work and the build of the work kind of forces me to use my body in a very physical and like laborious way, which was something that I needed, and I think you can see in the work. And so yeah, I think in that way, growing up an athlete, it was kind of inevitable, and that's really kind of like how this, like, the desire for that formed. It was like, I need to push myself. Like, I'm not someone who can just be like, okay, this is it and I'm good, like this is working. And so even going further with that, it's like, who knows what the work will turn into, because I'm always like pushing for the next thing, and honestly just trying to make things harder on myself. So yeah, I think that the way that I work is largely coming from and dedicated to growing up in that way.
Has there been any adjustment in the sense of, and I can't remember what sport you played, but so often in athletics, there is the pillar of the team and the coaches and this sort of like collaborative world that one is tied to. You're tied to your teammates, you're to your coaches, and then this is not true of all art forms, but oftentimes visual art can be a more isolating journey in the sense that your studio practice could be just you. Has that been a challenge, or do you find collaboration and community because of that background?
A huge challenge, even beyond that, just moving from Texas to New York. I think most people would agree, it's really hard to not just find, but maintain community here. Everyone's so busy and on the go, but there's a lot of solitude, and I've only started to feel that over the past few years, but I think in ways, I found ways around that, and I'm continuing to. So like one of my best friends I made in school in my MFA program is now my studio mate and helps me with a lot of the fabrication, which at first, I had gotten used to having my own studio, and so I didn't really want to do the shared thing, but I'm like, I don't know how I had my own studio for so long. It was so lonely. It's such a happy environment now. So in that way, like regardless of where you are in your career, I would definitely be an advocate for just still having a studio mate, to just have that like camaraderie and someone to be there. And I'm actually building out a studio in the back of my studio right now to bring in another artist, just to further that a little bit. But yeah, going from a very like team mindset to a very just self mindset has come with lots of challenges. But also a lot of time for really like a lot of self-reflection and like internal digging and stuff like that I probably never would have done prior.
Yeah. I not to take too hard of a left turn, but I do want to talk before we, jump to audience questions in a little bit. Talk a little bit about religion that is present in this show and has been present in your works. I always find it fascinating because this is something that is true for me the older I get, is when you're raised in a culture of religion, that is a culture in so many ways. So the aesthetics, the story, the characters of these religions sort of remain with us even when we feel tempted to break from the politicized nature of religion, or the way religion has been politicized. And I think your show explores that in a lot of different moments. Some of those Easter eggs are like larger and smaller. Do you want to talk a little bit about religion when developing this work?
Yeah. So I grew up Catholic, so Catholic that I remember whenever it came time for confirmation, for anyone who's familiar with the Catholic religion, I asked my dad, I was like, what if I don't want to be confirmed Catholic? Like, I don't know what, I want to know more. I want to learn more. He was like, you will break your grandmother's heart if you don't do that. So that's where I'm from. And my grandmother, my mama, just like the most important person in my life. The most Catholic and religious person I know too, but was also the most accepting and welcoming of me. And I was the most seen by her. She knew the whole time, apparently. So I guess because I was raised Catholic and I was hiding that I was gay the entire time. But then what I was met with when I did come out was just love, and not the kind of love that was, oh, like it's still bad, but we still love you. The love that was like, this is fine. Like this changes nothing, and I think a lot of people have a different experience from that, coming from a religious background and then coming out as queer. So I think in some of the works, it might be a little bit of pushing against religion and Catholicism, but in a lot of them too, it's again like the love there, like the importance of that in my life. And like, I guess, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's just religion for me, Catholicism for me, this idea of God is always there. It's always present. And for
Yeah.
me, for me personally, in my actual lived experience with my family, with my best friends, that's never been an issue. But for so many people, that's so different. And in just the greater context of religion, it is bad for queer people. So like, playing with that, like it's kind of going back to the general idea of Texas is very different from the lived experience of Texas for some people. And I think that that's what this is for me is, in a lot of ways, it was very restrictive for me growing up. It made it very scary to be who I was. I did feel like I was a sin, like I was bad because I grew up religious, but then I was faced with something entirely different whenever I did actually like come forward with who I was. So yeah,
It,
kind of back and forth.
yeah, I think it does speak so much to I just love work that confronts the monolith, whether it's the monolith of Texas or any sort of generalized experience where so often we hear the extremes of any given experience because those voices are the loudest. You either hear that um, there is religion and people do not get the sort of individualized, like they'll experience rejection because of that, or the opposite where there's a void of religion and that's a utopia, and in reality it's just a spectrum of experience. Like people can grow up in a culture of religion and each family is different and there is a range of how that is relayed. And I think the the visual like scars or ghosts or just honestly just like the aesthetics of that culture is so evocative. And there is something universal too about Christian and Catholic symbolism, especially in America, because it's been a predominantly Christian country for so long, that I think employing those symbols in work can it sparks something for everyone. They're visceral images. And I think can we go back to the hands again, Eleanor? I think this was a great one with the tattoo. And I remember you, Chloe, were telling me about just the title here. And
so this piece is a super personal one, and like I said earlier, not each individual work is always super personal or like specific in place or person, but this piece is actually me and my partner's hands, and the tattooed one is mine, but I have no tattoos. So I photoshopped that on. And I guess in this work, what I was thinking about was just the idea of like public queer intimacy, how it is kind of always public and really what is private within a queer context. And depending on where you are, something as simple as holding hands or a certain look, if the gaze is like too long or in like too romantic of a way, like even from block to block in New York, not even just, from New York to Texas, how you could be unsafe or accepted or rejected. And so for this one, I wanted it to feel like, are the hands coming together or are they coming apart? And depending on whatever context you place them in, it'll take on a different meaning. But for choosing to place the Christ tattoo, entitling this "The Eyes of Texas." It was just kind of, I guess at that time, I was more in the mindset of, or like thinking about the mindset that I grew up with of, this is bad, this is sin, I'm inherently bad. And even something as simple as holding my partner's hand felt like very bad to me for a long time, even after I came out. And that's something that I struggled with a lot, because of growing up as religious as I did, being like, okay, it's okay if I'm queer or gay to this extent, but not further, right? There's an acceptable extent. And that's kind of the mindset that I had adopted for a really long time. And so for this piece, placing the Christ tattoo with his eyes positioned just behind the bracelet, but kind of like looking up, and with the blood from the thorn crown coming down, kind of looking like tears in the way that they're placed as well. And hiding his eyes, it's kind of like, okay, is he sad for you that you can't like be who you are and he wants you to, or is he sad that you're exploring this or doing this? So yeah, just kind of simply put, that's what that work was about.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much energy in the space between the hands. It's like they say, it's like the moment before the kiss is really where like all the energy lives.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is present here as well. Yes, is it a pulling apart? Is it a coming together? So this show is your first major showing in Texas, correct, Chloe?
Yes.
Do you feel like after, because the show's winding down, so you've gotten to experience its run showing in your home state. Um, do you have thoughts about the future of contemporary art in Texas and how that landscape is evolving? Obviously the rail, we cover so much of New York and LA and these like major art hubs, but we've been expanding our coverage so much because the art world is expanding. What was your
Right.
experience showing in Texas as opposed to New York galleries?
Um, Honestly, not so different, which was kind of relieving. Obviously if you're going to the opening, if you're going to see my show, most people are going because they know what it's about and they know what to expect. I think only few walk in and don't know what to expect. But so I think in that way still is what's interesting is it's still a selective audience, right? It's like, who knows how many people who saw this work were actually challenged by it, right? Like I think it did offer more of like a safe space and like a comforting space than the latter. And I don't think that's bad. I think it's good. I think as it continues to grow in Texas, it will reach more people, and reach the people who I think need it more. But I feel like the show had a lot of exposure. I think a lot of people were seeking it out, and just art in general in Dallas, I think is like really coming up, and I think it'll continue to kind of expand in Texas. At least I hope it will. I mean, I would love to show again in Texas. It was really special for me. I think it'd be cool to show, even closer to the small towns and stuff like that like don't have access to this.
Yeah.
Definitely won't make the drive to come see a queer show, but maybe if it's a little bit nearer to home, they just happen upon it. So yeah, I mean, this show in particular, I think I would say was not so different from New York, but also like entirely different at the same time.
Yeah, it is really interesting how so often convenience dictates our ability to discover something or to challenge our own ideas. New York, just the nature of it being a walking city, a city with public transportation, it's so easy to stumble upon something, even when you're young and a gallery is just open and you can walk in and you can discover something. And the nature of not only Texas, but so many places in America being driving cities and sprawls, like our geography dictates the bubbles that we're stuck in. So it feels like you almost have to be proactive in certain ways here to bring people in who are not finding it on their own.
Yeah, totally. And I think just in general too, you know, the access that we have now to see work online prior to even seeing it in person, I think deters a lot of people. It's like, you know, if it's a painting, I think a lot of people can just kind of be like, okay, well, I saw it, and like if I miss it, that's okay. So, I mean, even for me, honestly, the work that I really want to go see in person is the work that I feel like I can't understand in a photo. Like I can't see fully in a photo. So, you know, hopefully this body of work was able to do something similar being in Texas, but yeah.
Yeah, I do think there is something about your work that we do get a sense of it in photos, but yeah, you really to get its full experience, you have to see it in person for all of those details that we discussed to to smell the art,
Yeah.
which is always a great detail. It was so funny. What is the smell on the
Black ice.
black ice? And
Oh yeah.
Chloe was like, don't you know, like that's what all the guys had in their cars when like
You have like 10 hanging from the rearview mirror, and you're just like blasted with the smell of white getting into the car. And like me, freshly coming out lesbian, I was like, yeah, I want that too. So
yeah, it is interesting how there are certain smells that just really evoke adolescent masculinity, like
yeah.
Axe.
Yeah.
And it was once you pointed that out to me, Chloe, it was so funny. I started seeing the black ice
Everywhere. Yeah.
everywhere.
It's never just one either.
Yeah. So that is interesting how it's almost like you want the images not to be so perfect of the art to convince people to give it a second chance.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, like going to see art should be fun. It should be exciting. And, you know, again, just my personal experience, my favorite shows, my favorite work is the work that I like see a photo of it and I need to understand what it looks like in person and how it was made. You know, I want to walk in and like look at the craftsmanship and like what it took to make this piece like come to life. So that is important to me.
Before we have just a couple minutes until we're going to go to the audience Q&A, but I just wanted to ask too if there are any influences to your work, any other artists, whether that's like visual or otherwise, that you know, have spoken to your development.
I would say mostly what I have been looking at the past few years is just general Americana imagery, old Western films. I think I get a lot of inspiration from books that I read. I have a list that I'm going through right now of just like historical queer lesbian books that I'm like trying to make my way through. So I think my practice at present is mostly informed by literature and film.
I love that. You should publish your book list with your next show as a read along thing.
Contemporary actually did a book fair recently and they asked me to recommend 3 books. So, but I thought that was cool because like that is really where a lot of, you know, my thoughts or like the beginning of a thought comes from. So
that's awesome. I think is the book fair, I think that our book fair is this upcoming weekend, maybe. I'll
so it hasn't even
check
happened yet. Okay.
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain. So again, if anyone's in Dallas, come this weekend to Chloe's show and the art book fair.
The excerpt that I'm going to read at the end is actually from one of the books that I recommended too.
Okay, that's perfect. Eleanor, I think for me, like I'm fine to jump into questions for the audience if that works for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Chloe and Madison. This conversation has been just so wonderful. I have so many notes and I just think the work is so amazing. So thank you, Chloe, for sharing everything.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's an honor. We've got a few questions from the audience here, and our first question is from GE, and I'll read it on his behalf. It's kind of a nice follow-up, actually, to Madison's last question. GE wrote, your work seems so very cinematic. I was thinking of The Last Picture Show. Could you reflect on possible influences of the work? It is so powerful because movies are so important in many coming of age, many coming of age in small towns. Thank you. So I think it's more specifically about cinematic references.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
small town escape thing is a great question.
I know I need to watch the one that he listed too, because I don't think I've seen that. Again, I've got a list, right? So I've just been kind of like blazing through it. So I cannot remember exact films, but there was one that I watched recently. It's actually a lesbian old Western, which is like really cool. And I watched
Whoa.
that right before I made this show. But yeah, what GE? Yeah, I do pull a lot from cinema. So it's I'm glad that you're seeing that and you're reading that. And thanks for the recommendation. I think I will. What is it? The Last Picture Show by Peter. But yeah, beyond cinema, I think right now more from literature, visually from cinema, yes, but the ideas and stuff from a lot of books.
You know the title of that movie?
Yeah, Chloe, I would love to know.
This is what I do, y'all. I like know I need to remember something and then I can't. And as soon as we get off, I'll just have to email it and share it. But
Yeah, we'll find a way to get the rec out there if you find it, Chloe.
it's like a staple. So I'm seeing if I can. No, it doesn't come up immediately. It's really good though.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for that question, GE. I would like to ask a question, Chloe, next. So there's so much I want to ask, but what I'm going to focus on is we've heard a lot about your practice in New York and your move to New York. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about leaving Texas, and more maybe about your practice in Texas and how it shifted when you moved to New York. And also just thinking about your identity and how it was affected by leaving your hometown. And yeah, that's my question.
So the practice question, I did not have a practice prior to New York. I got my bachelor's degree in science and played soccer in college. And then I played rugby shortly after, had a really bad knee injury. My mom was like, you're depressed. You love drawing when you were a kid. You need to get back into that. And I was just like, okay, like, fine, Mom, I'll do it. You've been telling me to do this forever. Like, I'll do it. Loved it and decided to apply for some MFA programs. And I was just like, I think this is what I was supposed to do the whole time. So that's what brought me to New York. So my practice began in New York. And along with my practice beginning in New York, so did me realizing I kind of really didn't know who I was. And I had kind of never really even tried to like understand who that was or where I came from. So a lot of my practice began in that, like, kind of just like breaking down everything that I thought I was to find who I really was. And New York gave me that, but art is really what gave me that. It was kind of like, okay, so I moved to New York with this idea of art being like, I'm just going to move there and I'm going to make some drawings and some paintings and sell them and life's going to be good. And I got to my MFA program and I was like, this is like so different from what I thought. So I was really naive in coming to art and in coming to New York. But I think that naivete allowed me to, it was good coming in a blank book, a blank page. And it was really kind of soul crushing at first, whenever I started kind of like trying to decipher myself to make good work. Once I realized what art really was and what it could be for the artist, what it could be for the world and the viewers, I just started picking myself apart. And so my earlier work was like really focused on gender expression and like what is male, like super basic. What is male, what is female, what is masculine, what is feminine. I went through a lot in that time. And then it just kind of over the years, as I learned more, as I read more, as I just experienced New York, in a totally different culture, more everything just kind of started to unfold. And I do attribute like most of my happiness and like selfhood right now to New York and to art. So that move was like it was like beyond life changing for me. It really allowed me to kind of like start my life, you know.
Thank you so much, Chloe. That was a beautiful answer. Our final question today will be from Chloe, from the Rail. And if anyone else would
Yes.
like to ask a question, feel free to send a message in the chat. But for now, this will be our closing question. And over to you, Chloe.
Chloe, I have so many questions for you. I'm gonna try to only ask two, but
Okay.
I have so many. Okay. So one of my favorite things about your work is the way you play with scale.
Mhm.
And the way scale sort of communicates a memory, a mythology, even when something seems like it's close to life scale and it's so vividly similar to life, like the beer cans, it's just large enough that it's still fiction. It's still this story. And I'm wondering how you developed that practice and that thinking about scale, because it's so central to the work.
Yeah. Yeah. The beginning of scale for me was it was a like personally a rough patch in a really important relationship to me in my life. And honestly, I was just pretty pissed off and combative at the time. And I was like, how do I make this person feel as small as they have made me feel? And that is literally where scale started, was I was thinking about them seeing the work, walking into the space, having kind of lost not faith in me, but not like believed in me, and just kind of like going against me and this and that. And you know, this was a relationship that I like super cherished. And so it was just like it really like hit home. And that's where scale started, was I was like, okay, I want to make work that depending, and I said this earlier, but this is where this comes from, is depending on who is viewing the work, who is in the space with the work, I want you to either feel extremely uncomfortable and extremely small, or like you totally fit and comforted. And I think beyond that, you know, it kind of turned into more of a focus on, okay, once I got past the personal stuff and like it gave birth to that, the scale has become much more kind of serving the purpose of creating this like immersive environment, creating this fictitious, partially fictitious world, like really creating a space. Like I talk so much about spaces and places and the importance of them. I don't want to just make pictures of them. I want to physically make them. And so I think that like scale for me is why that's so important, and why I struggle to make small work, because for me, it's like I'm losing a lot of the purpose of it. So that's actually where I'm at right now in my practice, is how do I make quote unquote small work and it still like feel like me, and it still feel like it's doing what I need and want the work to do, what the entire reason for making the work is. Yeah, I think that's my full answer to that.
Love that. And interrelated, I feel like I really love the hyper contemporary feeling of the backdrops to some of these works and their vividness and color. And then that being juxtaposed with the black and white of the figures. And
Yeah.
there's sort of this play across time and across stories and storytelling. And I just was curious if you wanted to expand on that at all in terms of
Yeah.
how you got there and how you got to thinking about those juxtapositions.
Yeah, I think in getting to that point, there was a lot of extremes on both ends. I think at one point in my work, it was maybe too far removed from the present and kind of dwelling in the past. And then I think in the beginning, it was too much dwelling in the present and not informed by the past. And so I think right now and continuing forward, having like a nice balance of that is kind of what I'm going for. I just feel it's so important for me, like the way that I came to art and the way that I came to talking about what I'm talking about in my work came from my history, or a queer history that I didn't know of before moving here, that I don't really want to let go of that, because it's not necessarily that like I don't want to return to the past. I don't want the viewer to feel like they're returning to the past. I just want it to be known and felt that what I'm talking about now in this present moment is informed by the past, because I think the present is is so hard to talk about. I think it's the hardest thing to understand because we're in the moment, we're living it, we're dealing with emotions and things we're seeing, and everything is happening all at once. You can't really understand something until that moment has passed. So you know, pulling these faces and these figures from the past, knowing that they do lend the work to a sort of nostalgia and historical and like past feel, it is important to me to make sure that I am placing them within a very distinct contemporary context, so that they are alive now and not just in the past, or like trying to place them in the past, but using them as characters in a film or a story that's happening right now.
You really feel that. Thank you so much for those answers. And thank you so much for this conversation today. It's
Yeah,
been
no,
a
thank you
pleasure
all.
to listen to you and Madison.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chloe. And honestly, every time someone else asks a question, I have so many more, you know, questions of my own and details of your work that I mean, there's just no time to get into, which is like the markings of a really great show about how I mean, if you ever get a chance to see Chloe's work, there's so many even like surrealist details in these small moments that are really beautiful and exciting. And I'm just excited to see what's next for you, Chloe.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll keep in touch.
Of course, of
All
course.
of us.
All of
Next
us,
time
the
you gotta
railing
let me know when
Chloe.
you come to New York. The railing Chloe. I like it.
Yeah.
And then yeah, do we have time for Chloe to read some more
Yes,
stuff on her? Okay, great.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you
It's
so
short,
much
so don't
again.
worry.
Over to you, Chloe.
But this is from the book 2 or 3 Things I Know for Sure by Dorothy Allison. Okay, it starts with this. You believe me? I'm a storyteller. I'll work to make you believe me. Throw in some real stuff, change a few details, and add the certainty of outrage. I know the use of fiction in a world of hard truth, the way fiction can be a harder piece of truth. The story of what happened or what did not happen but should have. That story can become a curtain drawn shut, a piece of insulation, a disguise, a razor, a tool that changes every time it is used and sometimes becomes something other than we intended. The story becomes the thing needed. That's it.
Wow, that was perfect. Thank you so much, Chloe. Madison, we have time if you wanted to read as well.
Yeah, I have a section from an essay by Gia Tolentino. I also have a poem, but I'm gonna read this part of this essay and then can tell me where we're at. So this is an ecstasy by Tolentino titled this is a essay titled Ecstasy.
I was like,
from Tolentino. And here we go, I'm just gonna jump in. As a kid, I was eager and easy. I made friends, pointed my toes in dance class, did all of my homework. In our daily Bible classes, I made salvation bracelets on tiny leather cords. A black bead for my sin, a red bead for the blood of Jesus, a white bead for purity, a blue bead for baptism, a green bead for spiritual growth, a gold bead for the streets of heaven that awaited me. During the holidays, I acted in our church's Christian musicals. One I remember was set at CNN, the Celestial News Network, where we played reporters covering the birth of Jesus Christ. On Wednesday nights at choir practice, I memorized hymns for prizes. In elementary school, my family moved farther west on I-10 to a place in the new suburbs where model homes rose out of bare farmland. On Sundays, I sat quietly in the back seat next to my cherubic little brother, creeping through gridlock as we drove east into the city, ready to sit in the dark and think about my soul. Spiritual matters felt simple and absolute. I didn't want to be bad or doomed. The two were interchangeable. I wanted to be saved and good. Back then, believing in God felt mostly unremarkable, sometimes interesting, and occasionally like a private, perfect thrill. Good and evil is organized so neatly for you in both childhood and Christianity. In a Christian childhood, with all those parables and psalms and war stories, it's exponentially more so. In the Bible, angels come to your doorstep. Fathers offer their children up to be sacrificed. Fishes multiplied, cities burned. The horror movie progression of the plagues in Exodus riveted me. The blood, the frogs, the boils, the locusts, the darkness. The violence of Christianity came with a great safety. Under a pleasing shroud of aesthetic mystery, There were clear prescriptions about who you should be. I prayed every night, thanking God for the wonderful life I had been given. I felt blessed all the time, instinctively. On weekends, I would pedal my bike across a big stretch of pasture in the gold late afternoon light and feel holy. I would spin in circles at the skating rink and know that someone was looking down on me. Toward the end of elementary school, the impression of wholeness started slipping. We were told not to watch Disney movies because Disney World had allowed gay people to host a parade. In 5th grade, my rapture-obsessed Bible teacher confiscated my Archie comics and my peace sign notebook, replacing the heathen paraphernalia with a copy of the brand new bestseller, Left Behind. A girl at our school died by electrocution when a pool light blew out into the water, and the tragedy was deemed the absolute will of the Lord. Around this time, television screens were installed all over campus, and the face of our folksy, robotic pastor bobbed around on them, preaching to no one. At chapel, we were sometimes shown religious agitprop videos, the worst of which featured a handsome, dark-haired man bidding his young son farewell in a futuristic white chamber, and then, as violins swelled in the background, walking down an endless hall to be executed, martyred for his Christian faith. I cried because, please, I wasn't heartless. After, we all sang a song called I Pledge Allegiance to the Lamb. And that whole essay, but especially this section, evokes similar things that Chloe's show does for me, where it's very reminiscent of what a childhood in certain areas of Texas can be like, where you're just kind of under this veil of Christianity, and at certain times it feels very decisive and special, and then can become dark, and so they kind of tied together for me.
That was so good. I can't believe I haven't read that yet. That's like literally, I'm ordering it today.
Yeah, everyone should order this collection.
That just described my show better than I could have.
Gia feels very much like a millennial Didion in certain ways to me. I don't know if she would like or dislike that description, but that's just by my personal reading. She's pretty great. And then I have one poem. It's very short, Eleanor. Is that okay? Okay. This is called South Texas Persephone. Someday the ground will open up and swallow me. Someday I'll be swept through the sand and the grass, will become a crown of burnt paper, and he will be there, tall, steel-toed, eyes like ice and whiskey, handing me my first drink. In the bar, we'll dance to a song I hate, but I'll cling to him anyway. This is the darkness of marriage, the burial of my preferences before they can even be born. This is my set of sins reaching out from a frozen lake where the smoke of his breath is interrupting. Look now, my heart is a fist of barbed wire. His heart is a lake where young geese go missing, show up bloody after midnight. I don't say a single thing. My dress is deep green, knotted, feathered at the seams. Oh, isn't this what my mother never wanted? Now I have 3 heads, one for speech, one for sex, and one for second guessing. And that's a poem by Annalicia Sotelo, who was also from Texas.
So good. And I should have found a better one, guys.
What are you talking about, Chloe? You're just so good.
All the
These are
readings were
things that your
amazing.
work is inspiring me to think about. So
Well,
you
yeah,
know
me
more.
too. I'm reading that now.
Yeah, those were such great readings. Thank you, Madison. Chloe, your reading was amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for the fantastic conversation. It's really just been such a pleasure this afternoon. I'd also just like to thank Kate and Nita from Albert's Benda Gallery for helping us prepare for today. And as always, we'd like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and for supporting our archive, which you can explore on the Rails YouTube channel and where this conversation will be posted shortly. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. And you can support our work via the link in the chat. And please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a 1 p.m. Eastern for a conversation on Department of Transformation, featuring Prem Krishnamurthy and Jonathan T.D. Neal. Huge thanks again, Chloe and Madison. And you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye. Thank you all. This has been amazing.
Thanks,
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you,
a lot of fun.
Madison.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
Madison.
Great
Chloe.
conversation.
Thank you so
Great
much.
conversation.
The
This was
best.
great.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you
Amazing
so
questions,
much.
Madison. That was so
Amazing
great.
questions, Madison. Go, Chloe.
Thank you.
Boys,
Bye.
congratulations.
Everyone. Congratulations.
everybody.
Take care,
Go see the
everyone.
show, you guys.
Go see the show.
Bye.
Go see the show.